doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
Well, a very warm welcome to everybody to this Making Investment Developmental session and Making Development Investable. And it's a play on words, and it's going to be a play on a paradigm and a new paradigm shift that we're going to be unpacking in this session. My name's Dr. Hubert Danso. I'm the CEO and Chairman of Africa Investor, and I chair the African Sovereign Wealth and Pension Fund Leaders Forum and the African Union's Continental Business Network. I think I'm going to take the Executive Secretary's good guidance where he said when it's a conversation on public and private sector, we should be frank and open because we're looking for some high degrees of transformation in our work. You know, 2023 has been a really big year. MDB reform agenda. We had the new Financial Pact Summit led by President Macron, which also drove an investment agenda to transform the global financial architecture. Then President Ruto led the African Climate Summit, which came out with this really innovative new program and platform and instrument called the Nairobi Declaration, which has been very warmly welcomed by both the domestic and the global institutional investment community. We all then went from Nairobi to New York, where we convened around the UN Secretary General's SDG focus, where we basically looked at the review of the SDGs. And there was an ambition summit. And again, that really doubled down on looking at the review of the global financial architecture. And I think my colleague also mentioned that there was a very big announcement of African multilateral financial institutions coming together during this Heads of State Summit that's really beginning to look at Africa's position and voice and leverage in that overall global financial architecture conversation. We then ended the year at the COP28 presidency in Dubai, where there was lots of finance discussions and a real flurry of announcements around investment in Africa, investment in green industrialization, and the new repositioning geopolitically, and one we believe that Africa should rise to the top, both economically as well as geopolitically. But there were four sort of key observations that we drew from those intense, open, and frank discussions. The first was that there is and has been a multilateral development bank private capital mobilization market failure, that we really need to address and understand those long tentacles and the impact that that will have on from education right through to industrialization. And I think this statistic has been characterizing this issue, which really talks about the private capital mobilization ratios. And there, it's fully understood and appreciated that for every $1 of multilateral development finance that's provided, that's supposed to catalyze and mobilize $10 of private capital. And unfortunately, according to the G20, that's resulted in, for every $1 of MDB finance provided, it's only mobilized 20 to 38 cents. And we know we're in a continent now where, unlike G7 nations, 90% of our financing needs need to come from the private sector, so we need an absolute different posture. And under this first observation that talks about how we need to embrace and then move on and build on and work from the recognition that we have a private capital mobilization market failure, it's really about appreciating perhaps a bit of a root cause to that. And the suggestion in line with the theme of this particular panel is that there's been a long history of essentially taking African assets or African development opportunities and really seeking to make the investment community that has a very different fiduciary mandate and really asking the investment community to make investment developmental, which is outside of the actual mandate. So that's just one key observation. The second observation that came out of all of these different initiatives and agendas is really looking at how we can ensure that we deliver on this need to incentivize this exponential increase in institutional allocations to African climate, African technology, and African SDG-related investments to close our $3 trillion financing gap between now and 2030 and then moving on to 2050. And I think the emphasis really needs to be placed on the words incentivized. We're now competing not in a world where we can develop a portfolio of projects and then take them around to our usual suspects, friends and colleagues, to see if the project is interesting. We're now working in a world of wholesale investment mobilization that's heavily incentivizing the private sector. An example being, we call them investment earthshots. In the United States, they have an investment earthshot known as the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, that Inflation Reduction Act in the last 12 months has been able to mobilize $500 billion of private sector capital for climate alone, which is essentially, in some cases, almost 10 times the amount that we as a continent have been able to mobilize over the last 10 years for all sectors for foreign direct investment. The fundamental piece of that is getting a model right, having a strategic plan to be able to incentivize capital to flow at scale. So the third point is, as we talk about this whole reform agenda that's designed to be able to mobilize private capital at scale, there's a bit of a misunderstanding happening in the market. The misunderstanding is that there's a presumption that an increased and optimized and leveraged multilateral development bank balance sheet is capable of closing the overall private capital mobilization gap for the continent. And in fact, the research has now shown that because of the size of the $1.5 trillion collective global multilateral development banks balance sheets, that at best, if all of the reforms are implemented, only 10% of Africa's financing gap will be met. So we absolutely need to really understand what has been called for. And what has really been called for is something described as climate investment statesmanship. It's really, I think one colleague said if our heads of state could have been here, they would have been participating in a very transformative conversation. I think a key part of our conversation is our heads of state are very, and rightfully so, involved on the public financing agenda. But we also have a 150 to a 200 trillion pool of institutional assets, both African pension funds and sovereign wealth funds and global institutional investors that have not really been engaged. So we've actually been calling for, these forums have been calling for more engagement with heads of state, which we're calling climate investment statesmanship, to create a new partnership which is known as an institutional investor-public partnership. And I'm happy to report that has not fallen on deaf ears. Those of you who would have been in the closing plenary yesterday for the Heads of State Summit, you may have heard President Ruto, when he was giving his report back on the outcomes of the Committee of African Heads of State on Climate Change, made a very explicit reference to the Heads of State commitment to work strategically and to work very pragmatically with both African and global institutional investors on mobilizing private capital at scale that supports the Nairobi Declaration, and of course a number of those elements also impact Agenda 2063. So, and the final sort of key observation was really that the paradigm shift is not coming, it is here. And that is one where we really need to look at a new investment and future fit business model to be able to attract private capital at scale. And I think it's one that's really much more predicated, as we've said, on not focusing on trying to make investment developmental, but being able to compete with the likes of the Inflation Reduction Act in the US or the Net Zero Industry Act out of Europe, but rather seeing how we can take our sort of developmental endowment and really make that investable to get the scale and drive the industrialization. So that's hopefully just a little bit of context about the theme and the focus and the discussion that we're going to be having about making development investable. So we're going to focus in this panel on looking at some of the bankable investment models to scale private capital mobilization at speed, and in, really looking at some key sectors. We've heard a lot about infrastructure. Now we're going to delve. We have some of the foremost investors and minds and institutions on this panel investing in infrastructure. Similarly, ICT, agriculture. And of course, we have a broad understanding and a framework that we want to be able to provide input into called the Nairobi Declaration and Agenda 2063. And I think all under the African COP presidency, which really is designed to do two things in terms of engaging domestic capital, as well as then enabling that domestic capital to leverage and crowd in that 150 to 200 trillion pool of institutional capital. It's called an institutional investor public partnership. So as I mentioned, I've got some of the great minds and institutions here with me, so let me just tell you who they are. There is a little expectation about a round of applause after I mention the names, just to be forewarned. So we have Admasu Tedesi, who is the President and Managing Director of the Trade Development Bank. Thank you for the round of applause, everybody. You'll understand why once he starts speaking. We have Mr. Solomon Asamoah, who is the CEO of the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund. Big round of applause. We have Kendra Gaither, who is the president of the US Africa Business Center and of the US Chamber of Commerce. Thank you. And we have someone who's going to tell me who they are, replacing another colleague, but I'm sure they're going to have some excellent things to say.
I'm not replacing anyone else.
Okay.
I am in your agenda.
Oh.
If you go down the list a little bit.
Down the list. Would you happen to be Christine?
I'm Christine. Yes,
From
I
the
am.
ITU.
Yes, I am. And I'm just so pleased to be on this panel with these distinguished panelists. And we are women and men on this panel, mind you.
We like to take a balanced approach here, so I'm glad that was recognized. Christine Sund, Senior Advisor for International Telecommunication Union, Regional Office for Africa. You are most welcome. Fantastic. So look, to get us started, I'm going to just call on my good friend and colleague, Admasu Tedesi, really just to give us his views on, we hear a lot about where are the African pension funds, where are the African sovereign wealth funds. We only invest in things that are strictly of a certain profile. And development tends to be described as one of those areas that falls outside of that profile. And we believe that if you want to take advantage of the opportunity of making development investable, we have to determine whether that's actually accurate or not. So I'm going to turn to you now, Admasu, and when we just look at the agenda, attracting African institutional investors to African development that has impact is absolutely critical. I think that's well established. But I'd like to have you share with us your experience about how you went about transforming a classical trade development institution to one in which now many African institutional investors, pension and sovereign wealth funds, form part of your shareholder base. Does that not counter or debunk the myth, or is there something that we don't know? Please share.
Well, Hubert, definitely. It's been a very unconventional route we've taken over the past 10 years. Going back to 2015 here in Addis when the SDG financing conference took place, the terms crowding in the private sector, the term leverage was everywhere. And there was this big sense that for us to be able to really get some serious momentum to the SDGs, you needed to bring in serious capital. And we all know that that's not taxpayer money, it has to be institutional money. And so we were historically always 100% state-owned or taxpayer-based in the sense of our shareholding. And we said, well, let's see if we can walk the talk. So we had some strategy sessions, we invited some institutional investors into some private discussions, and we said, well, what would it take to bring you into the fold? Not just at the level of transactions, not just at the level of private equity funds that DFIs might support or sponsor, but even to bring you into the institution itself, just to sort of drive home the message that partnership is serious. And so they said, well, we represent institutional money, which has a specific character to it. We need a triple bottom line. We know DFIs, MDBs do give impact, but how can you ensure you give us a reasonable return and give us a voice and give us a place at the table so that we can actually help ensure that triple bottom line agenda comes through. To cut a long story short, we went to our shareholders and we said we want to change the capital structure, we want to change the governance model, and we want to invite the real institutional capital in and give them an equal place, so to speak, at the table. To cut a long story short, that was about 8-9 years ago. Today we have 20 institutional investors who are shareholders of the bank. They sit in Ministry of Finance meetings alongside central bank governors, and they participate in a lot of discussions. And they have board seats. it's a very unconventional way to go for an MDB. And we're very fortunate to have African shareholders who are very open-minded and willing to innovate. Today we have a capital structure that involves Class A shares, Class B shares, Class C shares, and now we have hybrid capital. And some of these segments of capital were precisely designed to bring in institutional capital. And African institutional investors surprised us. We were never so sure how strong the response would be. We were actually doing roadshows in Europe and in Asia, because those are the usual money centers that we go to. Those are the typical targets, so to speak. And then all of a sudden, African pension funds in Rwanda, in Mauritius, in Seychelles, in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Mozambique, you had all these institutional investors who said, you know, we never had appetite. We never really believed in the triple bottom line proposition. We hear a lot of talk, but we don't see the walk. And so one by one, they came in, and today we have a track record of about 8 years, issuing consistent dividends to them, but giving them that very nice development impact. And now we're going beyond the normal capital structure. We're looking at hybrid capital. We're looking at doing special bond issuances in local currencies in the different African market jurisdictions. And it's been a real great story. And today, actually, we found a way to reward our institutional investors by going into the marketplace and finding deals and packaging them and allowing the guys who invested in us now to get a nice slice of the deals that we do in the marketplace. And now some of them are like, okay, so you promised to give us deal flow in addition to just coming into your capital structure, and we've delivered that. And I have an amazing story of a particular telecoms company that was not listed, that was privately held for almost 100 years. The investors finally felt that they had made enough money over a century, they were ready to leave, and they decided to sell this company. And we said to the pension fund, we know you don't have access to blue chip equity in your own market. We found a company that you might want to take a nice slice of. So we did something very unconventional. We literally did a merger and an acquisition type deal. We enabled a consortium to buy this company, but we told the consortium at least 25% of that has to go to the pension fund. Another 25% has to be listed on the capital markets so that the ordinary people in that country can also participate in the deal. And so we've shown that we're not just talking it, but we're doing it.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations to you. That is a living institutional investor public partnership. But I just want to stay with you just for 1 second for you to be able to distill that pitch. What was that pitch to the pension funds who classically would not have allocated to an institution like yours before you made all those necessary changes that got them over the line?
Now, most people would not expect this answer because we just came out of an AU summit. The big G word, the governance word, everybody expects that to have been playing out in the big summit. Well, here's the thing. In the financial world, in the corporate world, in banks, governance is king. Right? It's king. It's actually just as important as in the political space. So when you can actually give investors that comfort that you have a good strategy, but it's underpinned by a governance model that gives them comfort, it really opens up appetite. Because the big problem really is about whether people live up to their promises or not. And governance is very key in that. What we did is we gave them a sense of how the incentive structure was going to work. Once we got their money, we weren't going to turn our backs and kind of leave them out in the rain, so to speak, because that's sometimes what happens. So we brought them into the board. We came up with specific incentives for management, for staff, just to make sure that, you know, results would matter, not just in terms of annual reports, but they would have to matter in a very real way. And so now our institutional investors know that our interests are aligned, right? So we don't just look at them as soft sources of money or sort of long-term capital that doesn't have to be rewarded in the short term. We make sure that there's a dividend yield that comes through because pension funds have retirement people that need that flow coming through on an annual basis. And private equity funds typically take 10, 15 years to give you your money back. But what we said to them is we'll give them a nice equity return, but at the same time, we'll give them some healthy dividend yield, and we will not deprive them of the yield and the liquidity that they need. And so we've managed to do that. Even during the height of COVID, when the very simple thing to do was to suspend dividends, we wanted to send a message to African institutional investors that even when things were hard, we would still live up to our promises to them, and we still paid a dividend during that very difficult time. And so today our institutional investors are quite happy, and they're our ambassadors. I don't even have to pitch anymore. They go to pension fund conferences and they say, hey, triple bottom line, we did it with this DFI.
Fantastic. What an example of making development investable in a way that benefits all. And I think that alignment of interest obviously clearly goes and went a long way. So the perception that institutional capital will not go into something development, I think you've just addressed that very clearly. The next perception is that it is not possible to mobilize $10 for every $1 of finance. In other words, this multiplier, this mobilization capacity does not really exist in the market, so therefore we should just resign ourselves to a very low level of $1 of MDB finance equals 20 to 38 cents. But I'm going to turn to you now, Solomon, and you've worked with multilateral development banks and development finance institutions over a large part of your career, and now you're an African institutional investor who's actually been delivering $10 of private capital mobilized for every $1 of institutional capital that you provide. So I'd like you to just address two things. What lessons
invest in infrastructure throughout Ghana? But it did something quite unusual. It then put an independent board in place to oversee the investments, and didn't put a ministry official on the board of the institution, and gave us a very clear mandate that our role was to encourage private sector investors to invest alongside us in the market of Ghana. They gave us $250 million initially, which is a substantial amount of money for a country like Ghana. We knew straight away that $250 million would not be able to get the impacts that we wanted. We need to leverage the private sector. And so we asked ourselves, what is the best way to do that? Well, we realized that there's two things that you need to do if you want nation will run. So since that time, we have now invested around $325 million in 13 infrastructure investments across Ghana. We have managed to raise $10 for each $1 that we've put in to the investments. So when our investments or projects are finished, it will represent about $3 billion of investment into Ghana. We've also, as well as having investors or financiers invest alongside us in the project, we've also managed to get investors or financiers to invest into the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund by providing lines of credit from two reputable DFIs, the African Development Bank and the French Development Agency. And we are talking to a couple of other DFIs as well to provide financing. When they first did their due diligence on us, the DFIs, they went through everything. How we operate, how we work, our management structure, our governance structure, our decision-making structure. And that was the sort of rigor that enabled them to feel comfortable enough to provide financing to GIF. So it's not a rocket science, but it's quite difficult to actually put into place. The other thing that's extremely important is your selection of projects, money from the international community. It's a very interesting model. It's worked very well. We are now looking at further sources of funding and further sources of projects that we are doing. But essentially, those are the lessons that we've learned for the Ghana Infrastructure Fund.
Thank you. And advice to other MDBs, if you were going to distill this into your little bottle of potion that they could use to transform their private capital mobilization ratios?
Far be it from me to advise the mighty MDBs. But I think that, well, we have to be clear about something. We were mobilizing private sector for cash-generating private sector-led projects. So we know what the private sector needs to see. They need to see cash flows. They need to see a line of sight to how they're going to be repaid. If the multilaterals are doing the same thing for public sector investments, then the criteria may be a little bit different. But if they're trying to leverage private sector, then the rules are the same. The private sector will tell you what they need to see before they're all right to check. You can't bully them. You can't guilt trip them. You can't make them try and feel sorry. If they don't see what they need to see to satisfy their credit committees or their boards, they won't write a check. So you have to make sure that you give them what they need to see.
Yeah. So I suppose that's coming back to the previous point, that it's a little bit of a futile exercise trying to make investment developmental if it doesn't meet the basic criteria. And perhaps you might lose a lot of time and a lot of development opportunity if we persist, perhaps going down that route that hasn't necessarily delivered.
I wouldn't leave it at that. I would twist it around, and also you can make development investable. So if you put the right capital structures in place, if you put, if necessary, a first loss in place, if you put certain structures in place, then you can attract the private sector more easily. And this is the whole topic of blended finance, which we've heard much about.
Fantastic. We may just come back to you on that one as well, but I'm going to move to Kendra now. I think a lot of this is talking really about ecosystems to be able to get the scale. The market needs to have a high degree of confidence. You know, we're very sentiment-based. So to you, Kendra, I think you appreciate, I think we all appreciate that institutional investor-public partnership ecosystems are critical to delivering this private capital mobilization at scale. So of course we've talked a lot about infrastructure, but I'd like to get your views on what are the key strategies and opportunities that you see that could make agriculture development investable for private capital to be mobilized at scale into that sector.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the honor of being here and being able to join all of you in this conversation. I'd like to first start by aligning myself with the comments of my distinguished panelists, because I think what we're talking about in terms of the ecosystem, what we're talking about in terms of making investment in agriculture investable, are very much the same criteria that you see across sectors, very much the same. For those of you who are not as familiar with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, let me just tell you a little bit about why I'm honored to be here today. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is about a 100-year-old institution. It's the world's largest advocacy organization. We are present all across the United States and have a very broad reach globally in terms of our affiliates, our American Chambers of Commerce, which are present in over 100 nations around the world. So with a presence like that, which includes millions of companies in our membership, we often get questions about how can we increase more investment in our country. And so as government leaders come to the United States and meet with their counterparts, or they're at the United Nations or what have you, they come and they ask us at the Chamber, how do we get more American investors to come to our market? And so it does, we're quite frequently having these conversations about how to spur investment into spaces maybe where there hasn't been as much representation. And what I heard from my panelists is very much the kind of conversations that we have and the way in which we know business community assesses opportunities. They're looking first at whether or not there's an opportunity. Then there's the question of whether or not they have access to that market. And then third, it's questions of rule of law. And so questions that you heard around governance, questions that you heard around that feeling of trust, understanding what the rules are for being able to navigate a market, are as important for an institutional investor as they are for any other type of investment. This is particularly important when you're talking about infrastructure, or in the case of agriculture, it's not just crop yield in and of itself, because there's an ecosystem that's involved in how that plant first is seeded, how it grows, how it's harvested, and how it gets to market. And this is particularly important for the continent because, as you all know, and as we heard Fred Splonaker say this morning, there's a significant amount of food product that is imported into the continent that has the most arable land in the world and has great capacity to be not only the breadbasket for the continent today, but as populations grow and as the world continues to grow, is well poised to do that. And so, given that, and given that the Nairobi Declaration does call, as part of its call to action to boost agricultural yields, we convened our business community to take a look at how we could help propose solutions to being able to make agriculture more investable. And truly, solutions for increasing capacity and productivity on farms within Africa are needed to be able to not just feed the growing population, but to be able to look at the ecosystem that enables that. So we were able to launch a report that I brought a copy of it, you can find online, called Enabling Ecosystems, that gets very much to that point. And this white paper was produced and taken to COP28. But looking at sustainable agriculture in support of smallholder farmers in particular, who make up the majority of farmers on the continent, and really focusing in on that community, which is key for producing yields, key for increasing efficiency, and often fall in the gap of those who are not easily able to access funding to be able to scale and to grow. And so our goal in advancing these policy recommendations was really about how we talked to our partners to help them mobilize and be creative in their solutions, but also in our government partners as well in terms of creating more opportunities for investment in this space. And how we could really help expand partnerships between the private sector and multilateral institutions to do so. And so I'd like to pick up two of the solutions that we called out in particular. One has been referenced by my distinguished panelist here, Solomon, which is the question of blended finance. That it is as effective in agriculture as it is in other spaces, and really the idea being that it can help enhance efficiencies, and especially so when you look at the life cycle of the project, anticipating all stages of a program from conception to upkeep and a financial plan. This means bringing in financing preparation facilities, feasibility studies, cost to serve capacity, and infrastructure needs, as I mentioned before. And really, often where we find that there's gap in this process is at there's an effort to develop, but there's maybe not as much consideration in terms of maintenance and upkeep costs that have to be factored into the financial commitments that are necessary to really spur sustainable agricultural programs. Second, I would just call out the opportunities that our recommenders pointed to in microfinance options. And I think that strengthening microfinance is really critical when you look not just at smallholder farmers, but when we talk about the inclusive nature of growth that's called for in the Nairobi Declaration, because in bringing out more microfinance opportunities, you're allowing for more participation, and this particularly allows us to be more inclusive in women farmers, and women access to loans, which we all know has been shown to markedly reduce poverty levels. And so we found that increased support for MFIs, particularly from international institutions, as well as national government subsidies and tax policies could help expand the longevity of these loan programs. And so really what we see is that as you look at the African Union's Agenda 2063 strategy, and we look at how to mitigate risk, which is really key in how you build that space of trust and encourage more investors, the idea of co-investing and how to co-invest with small farmers to scale, whether that's through equipment, through inputs, through knowledge and skills transfer. These all are part of supporting a critical component of development on the continent when you look at agricultural possibilities.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Kendra, for that. Just staying with you just very briefly. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's been a lot of interest from both African as well as global institutional investors to have some clarity on this ongoing conversation around climate, as you mentioned. There's the Nairobi Declaration, agriculture, and AGOA. So we understand that AGOA may now be a means to be able to enable investors and countries to be able to participate in some of the incentives and benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act. Have you come across that issue at all? Are you seeing the administration in the US? I know you're right across the road from the White House, so as they go to the White House, they then come and see you to get the private sector take. Is this an issue that you're hearing a lot?
It's a fantastic question because we are starting to see that in the process. For those of you who don't know, and I'm sure you all do because we're all very accurately and acutely aware that the AGOA, African Growth and Opportunity Act, is scheduled to expire on September 30th, 2025. And that's a real challenge because anytime there is a window of horizon for investment, it's longer than a year, it's longer than 18 months. And so the fact that there is this precipice that is out there that there's some concern that AGOA will not be renewed in a timely way is a real concern. And as the debate continues, one of the conversations that has happened is how do we ensure that AGOA, which the Chamber supports being reauthorized, and we're continuing to talk not just to the administration but to Congress, which has a say in this. But as we talk to them about reauthorization, what we're hearing is there's a desire to ensure that utilization of AGOA increases, so not just that it is extended, but we're all intentional about ensuring that utilization can grow, but also in looking at how there are how's connective tissue between things like the Inflation Reduction Act, things like spurring investment that will allow for greater yield and greater usage of AGOA. So that's a conversation that's happening real time. It's in agriculture, it's in other sectors as well, and we're looking forward to doing our part to not only see AGOA extended, but to collaborate on ensuring that the utilization is much higher so that African countries can benefit from this program.
Fantastic. Now we're going to jump from agriculture to ICT, tech, green tech, artificial intelligence, robotics, data centers, and all of these great things. And I'm sure that you're going to be able to help us, Christine, unpack some of those. But I think really, we just really want to get a sense from you about what are the best institutional investor-public partnership options. There's a whole different long-term patient capital ecosystem that operates in different continents around the world. What do you think is going to be required to actually get private capital at scale to see, our trajectory to be able to go from education in STEM right through to these very productive and transformative technologies? Ideally, from our good friend and colleague here who's talked about the battery manufacturing value chain starting in the billions and then ending in the trillions. This is what President Ruto made as one of his key messages during the Africa Climate Summit. For us as the long-term institutional investment community, we want to be able to allocate to what we would describe as an investable asset class. So what we're really looking for, I suppose, from across all of these different areas, be it infrastructure, be it agriculture, be it ICT, be it education, how can this be aligned with our investment policy statements and mandates so we don't have to, as long-term allocators and institutional investors, have to look at projects on a singular basis, but we can look at it and create an investable asset class. It'd be really great to get your views on that, about how you see that unfolding and the opportunities there.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Danso, and excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's really a pleasure for me to be here with you. And my case, I will actually take technology and the need for digital infrastructure and the investment therein within a very specific case, but I think it really applies to all the different sectors, including agriculture that was just talked about, and we also had discussions about education this morning. So my focus here is really on aspiration 6 of Agenda 2063, which is, let me read, an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people. So it's really with people at the core here. And couple this with an Africa whose development needs to be anchored in education. So also making reference to SDG 4 and the discussions we held here this morning, and that was also emphasized in the panel just before us. We cannot achieve all of those excellent value change without skilled people. So let me go a little bit deeper into that. And we heard on Friday in the pre-launch of African Union's theme for 2024 on education that there is actually not enough money. African countries do not have enough money to implement SDG 4. And it was really called for alternative approaches. And I think you also, moderator, mentioned those. We need to have alternative, new approaches to look at how we can finance this. And also with reference to Honorable Minister's comment earlier, our spear focus is on connectivity of schools, connectivity of students, teachers, and with this bringing connectivity to communities. And let us look a little bit about the numbers that are required as a backdrop before I speak to what we had in mind and to answer more directly your question there, dear moderator. So first, if we look at what is needed to address the digital infrastructure financial gap, so we need that digital infrastructure to connect schools, but also connect inside schools. Before we can even talk about bringing digital technologies to scale education and bring quality education across the continent. So we can see that at the global level, we have a digital infrastructure financing gap of more than 420 billion US dollars. This is what's required to connect the remaining 2.6 billion people on the planet to the internet, to connectivity. And we see here that almost 70% is required in low-income countries and in underserved regions. And here we don't only have an investment issue, we really have a complex challenge that has also a development aspect of it. Because when there is lack of connectivity, we are depriving communities of opportunities to meet the specific socioeconomic targets and goals. So connectivity there is really the discussion I want to have here within this investment context. And this lack of investment in infrastructure really makes these inequalities even bigger. And we can, if we think then even further when it comes to landlocked countries or those really remote areas, that even is aggravated further. So I don't want to go into the things that have already been mentioned here, the gaps in traditional finance, but also the opportunities there, of course, with blended financing. So now that's where I'm just going to focus on the contribution I wish to bring to this discussion. Because we really see that if we look at a blended financing approach and apply this across sectors, we can really de-risk the investment, and de-risking the investment in connectivity that is there as an enabler across these sectors. So, but we also see that there is not enough use of blended financing options for expanding digital infrastructure. OECD reports say about 1% is used, and so why is this, and why is this now then such an opportunity that we should explore together? So let me then go to my use case, which is an initiative where many of you are involved, and it was also mentioned this morning by the minister from Botswana in terms of Connectivity for Schools, a UNICEF ITU initiative that really looks at connecting a school, connecting the community, and with that bringing the benefits to the entire country. So what is Giga's unique position in mobilizing funds and partners? And why is this working so well now? And of course, with your help here and your expertise in investment and financing, we hope to go even further. So we're looking also for some suggestions on that in from you. So at the core is really strategic partnerships and bringing together different types of expertise. So when we look at UNICEF, for example, has a global reach. ITU has expertise in standards, connectivity, and digital solutions and infrastructure deployment. And through this, we've been able to establish a collaborative framework that unites public and private sectors, directing infrastructure towards those critical connectivity solutions that are there. We cannot do connectivity without the private sector. It's as simple as that. It just cannot be done. And we see this also from the past experience. It needs to be a joint venture between public and the private. So if we look then at, well, what does Giga really do for those of you who are eager to learn more about Giga? And I wish I had a big map here on the screen here. We help governments to map schools and then have real-time connectivity information feeding to the government on whether or not those schools are connected or offline and then needs an intervention. And you would here see a map of African countries with a lot of red dots because the schools are not collected, but more and more green dots where we can see which operators are providing connectivity to connect schools. We also model infrastructure, regulatory data, so we work with this data to really provide the governments with the information they need for decision making on investment. And then, and with that information, we then support on governments to find those right layered financing solutions to pay for connectivity, for the infrastructure, the CapEx, but also to have sustainable models in place to keep those schools connected once the infrastructure has been drawn there. And finally, we also help governments to explore how to contract connectivity for schools. So here, emphasizing again the core strategic partnerships. We are also looking at innovative financing solutions, and through us working with governments, bringing in a mix of private, public financing, grants, loans, and funds from the Universal Service Fund, and I can speak to that a little bit more later if that is useful for those of you who may not know what the Universal Service Fund is for connectivity. So up to now, we've been able to unlock over 1.7 billion for school connectivity. And just so that you don't get me wrong, this is not money that is coming into ITU or UNICEF pockets by any means. This is really money that is being invested in the country context to meet national priorities and national targets and goals. And then just finally, also to mention the technology component here. Yes, we have been using AI modeling to find additional schools to be connected. So we would look forward here also to exploring those partnerships further. And that information is fed back to the government for decision making. We are also exploring in different other ways, and this is really we're learning as we're going. We're bringing engineers, data scientists together in our Giga Technology Center in Barcelona. The Giga headquarters is in Geneva. And I do encourage you all to send your engineers and data science to work with us for some time to develop solutions that will meet your specific country needs. So I think finally, I think that's where I can leave the discussion for now. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. That was a really helpful intervention. And I think Jeffrey Sachs and a number of others, President Nana Akufo-Addo, and others at the Global Partnership for Education, absolutely, absolutely. You know, talked about the return on investment for education being in the region of about 20%. So really beginning to package that as an investment opportunity linked into the whole overall ecosystem is a really important.
Can I just make a quick intervention?
Yes, you may.
Because the ICT sector is so important. We thought about it long and hard as the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Ghana, what we can do in the ICT sector. And we figured out that, you know what the problem is? The problem is the basic infrastructure is not there. If you build the basic infrastructure, the private sector will take over. The innovation and the thinking and the tech and the digital will all sit on top of the basic infrastructure. In a place like Ghana, we were lacking the basic infrastructure. So we formed a company with a private sector company that's laying terrestrial fiber across the country. We are now, before the end of the year, we will have laid fiber that touches the north, east, west, and southern borders of the country, as well as data center, etc. Once that happens and we lower the cost of broadband, then it becomes much easier for the private sector and all the users of it to lay on top of it. And we could take a longer-term view as the Sovereign Wealth Fund, as the investor, and take a long view of getting repaid that maybe some private sectors couldn't do. But that was the model and the approach that we used for the ICT sector development.
Fundamental and foundational. So congratulations to you on that. That's exactly what we need, and we want to see that scaled across the continent. But again, we come back to this issue of scale. And I want to get your views on not only the issue of scale, but how that can actually then link into filling that gap. Because I think when we tend to hear scale referenced in the marketplace today, it's effectively orders of magnitude that we're talking about as opposed to the scale that's required. I think we've already seen the research which says after all of the reforms and all of the scaling of these public sector balance sheets, there's still going to be a 90% private capital mobilization gap. We've talked about blended finance. To de-risk just our climate technology-related projects, the 3 trillion, that's about a 550 billion to a 750 billion de-risking gap. And if we begin to look at what our sort of blended finance capacity is in the market, that is under 100, well, it's under at 1 billion. And we're now talking about 550. So it's that transformative leapfrogging, conceptual thinking that we're trying to figure out. How do we create an investment case that links that, for example, at 550 billion to 1 trillion with the 150 trillion to the 200 trillion pool of capital as an investment proposition? I think we already know the value of investing in education over the medium to long term. You can get a return, but also then you boost education and you completely transform markets. The second point that comes into this, which would be interesting to get your views on, is there's been some pushback around blended finance. And as you know, from the investment community, we're rather sentiment driven. So as we talk about education, there's also a lot of education that needs to happen in the investment community. So part of the thinking around blended finance is that as we communicate there is someone to take a first loss in a transaction, we're effectively saying there's going to be a loss coming from an African transaction. So I think what the messaging is sort of suggesting is, as we talk about the first loss coverage, that we can also talk about there is a misperception of risk, and there's perceived risk, and there's also actual risk. So I'd be interested to get your final views on that, and what would your top recommendation be to heads of state to be able to crowd in private sector capital at scale to address this elephant in the room, this 90% that we still have to address even after all of the MDB financing reforms. How can we address that 90%? So perhaps let me start here, and then we just come along, and then we'll close out that way. So over to you, Kendra.
Thanks for the question. And I would just say that what's exciting to me about being on this panel is I think there's a lot of synergy in terms of how we are all thinking about these issues. And as someone who's worked in government and academia and business, what I've seen is that in each seat where you're sitting, there's a key gap in terms of how you're engaging. And so I think when I think about recommendations and I think about how we're going to address these things, it's really about co-creating solutions. And that's something that we're very much active in. I'll just give sort of 2 examples. One that's part of ag, broader ecosystem, but one in terms of how we're mobilizing investors and trying to help address those perceptions of risk. I would call out an ambitious project that is happening that's bringing together Angola, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Zambia, the build out of the Libido corridor that I'm sure many of you are aware of. These governments came up with an effort to really build out a holistic ecosystem of infrastructure through rail to create opportunities to be able to build out agribusiness there that could utilize that rail system, as well as access to global markets for production and movement of mineral goods. And that's an ecosystem issue where for an investor who is new to investing, the question of how you interact into this ambitious plan is one that wasn't entirely clear. And so a number of countries came together through a G7 partnership for global initiative, global infrastructure investment, put down $600 billion worth of support behind this project to try and create a floor for companies to feel comfort in coming into this space and being able to bring their expertise for renewable energy, for agribusiness, for all of the different aspects that are going to connect communities and create infrastructure for additional growth. And so I think being creative and co-creating solutions is going to be a key way. And then second, I would note that a few years ago, the Chamber of Commerce started a program called Advance with Africa that really directly speaks to the question of how do we break down this perception of risk so that we're elevating success stories like the ones that we've heard on this stage that are practicable solutions that other investors can follow in terms of accessing the market, because we know the opportunity is there. We know the innovation is here on the continent. We know that there are solution sets that can be elevated. It's now just breaking down the risks and giving investors a greater opportunity to understand the upsides of being here and being co-creators in that partnership. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Solomon?
Thank you. For me, the challenges of blended finance is the way they've been made too complicated by the providers of the so-called subsidized capital. I mean, essentially the definition that I hear, I don't know if they've changed it recently, was your project more or less has got to not be profitable, but if we give you the capital, you make it profitable. And that in itself turns off the private sector, because it means that the cushion or the margin for profitability is very suspect. So I think it's better differently structured. The way we do it, we decided to do it at GIF, is to actually provide equity, but take the same risks that the co-investors or co-financiers are taking. So if we lose money, if they lose money, we lose money. If we make money, they make money. And we found that there was a much greater resonance from co-financiers and co-investors to that structure, because we have the weight of the sovereign behind us. That can be a good thing, that can be a bad thing. But it's a really good thing when you're doing infrastructure projects, because you have to be really close to the government to unlock or to solve problems. And the fact that I can pick up the telephone and we can get to the highest levels of government and hopefully try and solve the problem gives a great deal of comfort to potential co-investors and co-financiers, as long as we operate as a commercially minded entity. So there's different ways of mitigating the risk to attract the private sector.
Africa 10, 15 years ago, there's a very high chance you could go and walk into a branch of a global emerging market type bank and get facilities, open letters of credit, get working capital and all of that. This day and age, the punitive environment of global regulations has made Africa even more risky. And this is very unfair. And Africa has institutions like us who are there to sort of stopgap some of these measures. But at the same time, you now have new global regulations coming in and making it even more difficult for us to operate. And I think this is where the UN has an important role to play, because we don't have a voice in the global financial system. This is what President Ruto's been saying. This is what a lot of African leaders have been saying. We already have the credit rating system that is so badly stacked against us. You know, the whole perception issue has been made very clear. You know, it's not about always a reality. It's just about, you know, a bad narrative that's out there. We have a number of partners as TDB who have exited the African continent, and they've just said to us, the cost to serve Africa is just too high. We're not interested anymore, right? And why is that cost so high? It's not that there's no technology. We know fintech has been very successful in Africa. There's a lot of agency banking. MFIs have become very successful at the microfinance level. But you now have global regulations that have created an environment where it's just very, very difficult to get over the hump and say you're going to continue doing business in Africa. And so I think even in markets like Kenya, which is supposed to be one of the more interesting emerging markets in Africa, even there you have banks exiting. Big names, I don't want to mention them. And I don't think global regulators are thinking enough about, you know, the very rigid policies that are being introduced to combat things that do need to be combated, whether it's money laundering or counterterrorism financing. These are all very bad things that need to be dealt with. But the policy responses tend to be very blunt, and what you have the effect of is basically crowding out all of these institutions, and they say, hey, it's not worth it anymore. I'm not going to take an $8 billion fine for being active in Africa. I don't make that kind of profitability in Africa. It's a low volume environment. It's just not worth investing in all of that compliance and whatnot. So I think there are these issues. And then, of course, as African multilateral financial institutions, we're now grappling with new global regulations that are just sneaking up upon us. All of a sudden, we take the big risks going into last mile jurisdictions, least developed countries that the UN is always talking about. We know that the normal private sector doesn't go into most of these LDCs. How many African countries are investment grade rated? Very, very few. You can count them on one hand. And it's already rough enough as it is, but you have these very blunt regulations always coming out globally that doesn't help the ecosystem. I have clients from Europe, from the US, banging on my doors often for facilities because they don't have other financial institutions to access. And I say, geez, I wish I could go to your capitals and tell them that I'm actually your handmaiden too. Maybe they should help me also be more effective and not always throw these spanners in the works. So I think there are these bigger issues that need to be discussed at forums like this that are bridges between Africa and the rest of the world.
No, I completely agree. This whole issue of regulation, I mean, banking and financial services regulation, and these sort of punitive, supposedly unintended consequences, absolutely we have to deal with. But then when we talk about all of our advantages around green tech, our natural capital, and youth bulge and dividend and all of these different things, then we know that there's a $10 trillion per annum and growing global green industrial economy, and then we see CBAM on the left-hand side. So I think what we are hoping, and we really look forward to under the leadership of the Executive Secretary, is to see how this forum can exist alongside each heads of state level African Union summit. Because we believe that this is an issue that really plays into this whole issue of what we're calling for, which is climate investment statesmanship. We want a conversation where the largest pools of institutional capital can support your engagement, can support other multilateral finance institutions' engagement like the Africa Club. As universal owners, we own public and private sector assets around the world. So we believe we can play a role. We want to play that role in partnership with the Africa Business Forum and the Executive Secretary and his team here at ECA. So absolutely got your point. And then bookend and closing remarks.
Let's be positive. That's maybe what I would say. And let's also include connectivity of schools within this portfolio. Let's make investing in connectivity of school as a very attractive and business opportunity as well. In order for us to do that, we need to work together to develop a very interesting, trustworthy investment opportunities. And we can do this together based on data, information, and sit together and create those business opportunities and investment proposals. And this is really what we have done through GIGA already. We have worked together looking at the private and public funds that are available, see how we can use those to even go further. And let me give you an example of what we did in 2023 in 4 countries. And let me mention the countries: Kenya, El Salvador, Sierra Leone, and Sao Tome and Principe. So actually across different continents here, we were able to work together and mobilize a total of 400,000 million in loan and grants coming from the European Union, the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, and the Islamic Development Bank to augment the national funds that are there on the table. So this is my plea. Let's be optimistic. Let's look for new solutions and explore areas that we haven't done before. Bring partners and stakeholders, perhaps who have not yet discussed these matters together, and then with that, get investment into connectivity of schools, and through the connectivity of schools, connect communities and also support the other sectors.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, you were last in, and you were first in, and now you're last out with those excellent remarks. Let's all be very positive. Institutional investor-public partnerships between large pools of capital, the private sector, heads of state and government, I think are the conversation that we need to have and can deliver this developmental dividend that we're all looking for. Please join me in thanking my excellent panel for their comments, and thank you for being such a great audience. Thank you.
We'd like to continue the conversation and allocate a few minutes to commentary, questions from the audience.
Okay, wonderful. That's a privilege. Okay, if you could, raise your hand.
Please.
We'll take the lady over here.
So I'm just going to take these
Wonderful.
4 questions here, and then we will wrap
Super.
up there.
And if you could just please identify yourself and who you're directing the question to, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Stella Agara. I am here representing an organization known as the MS Training Center for Development Cooperation, based in Arusha, but specifically their flagship youth program, which is the One Young Africa program. So the constituency that we work for, which is young people between the ages of 18 and 35, around this conversation are normally very concerned about sustainability, safety, and security, and the ethical conversations around the issues of science, technology, and innovation. And listening throughout the day, I have picked that we were basically celebrating innovation, celebrating science and technology, but I felt like the conversations were kind of lacking in a conversation about ethical considerations. Africa is last in the game, and therefore we do not have to make the same mistakes that other people have made before. That's the advantage of coming last. Are we having sufficient ethical conversations? Do we have a space where we are negotiating on behalf of our continent concerning this? And do we ensure that all the voices then find their way into this conversation in a way that they are not silenced, especially in the spirit of leaving no one behind as espoused by the SDGs? The second one has to do with indigenous knowledge, connection to technology. I don't know whether, because sometimes business is about bottom lines, but I don't know whether investment is now focusing on ensuring that indigenous knowledge in Africa finds its way into how we adapt technology, and especially if there is indigenous knowledge that is superior to what we are trying to adopt, that we ensure that then it is elevated, it is given prominence, and that we constantly try to ensure that we sell some of that indigenous knowledge, especially where it relates to dealing with food security, food sovereignty, keeping the power to produce in the hands of women and young people, as it has been, and also addressing matters of health in the continent. I think it's extremely critical that we don't leave this conversation celebrating without thinking about what do we need to be careful about, and injecting that into our education system to ensure that those who are inheriting the technology or are on the other end of this investment are actually going to find a creative space to continue implementing the technology and not start struggling with new problems as far as the health indices and other safety indices are concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella.
Thank you very much. My name is Elias Lewy. I'm from Institute of Geophysics, Space Science and Astronomy from Addis Ababa University. And that is the oldest research institute in Ethiopia, more than 65 years old. And my question will be to all that were giving a presentation from the morning to until now. I was expecting to hear something more in the research area, but for me, I was feeling that it is a modus operandus. I mean, when we are talking, I mean, my sister here also said it now. I mean, how far are we ready to invest on basic research? This is my question, because when we see European countries, European Union, and banks there, and in US and so on, part of their development investments, they are doing it in basic research area. But when we see here in Ethiopia, let it be AI and so on, we are talking AI also needs basic research. Without basic research, we cannot talk about artificial intelligence. So how far are we ready to invest on basic research? Because, for example, some European or US agencies are investing in basic research on Africa, but their researchers, the way they want it, we have to come in partnership with them, and we will work to what they defined as research. Okay? How far are you ready to support African Research Institute so that they can strengthen their research to solve the societal problem? Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Masara Warner. I'm the founder and managing director of IGNA Investment. We do run equity crowdfunding platform to mobilize capital, especially from the African diaspora that sends billions into the continent to finance African SMEs that are the engines of Africa. So my question to the panel, especially you, Admasu, is that you mentioned using unconventional approach to get to institutional investors to come up with a win-win, not only for TDB, but also to the investors. So how do you think that could be translated into, in a very, very small scale, like the SMEs investment, to go into blended financing, for example. You also mentioned about how many investable companies are there in Africa. You know, we used to think that the issue was investing and mobilizing capital, but also it is really challenging finding investable, attractive destinations here in Africa. So how do you think we can be unconventional as well to attract even putting you on the other side and FDB to attract you to support us, to technical assistance, to get them to be investment destinations, as well as blended financing. And extending my question to Solomon, maybe using blended financing, not to catalyze 1 to 10, but maybe even get to 1 to 5, because there is a lot of capital and amazing African businesses that we can catalyze. How do we translate that from your perspective? Thank you.
And just in front of you.
My name is Shamiso Fred. I'm from Zimbabwe, and I'm the CEO of an organization called African Business Women Association. I'm not going to talk about SME because that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. That is an engine room for all economies in the world. There's a huge gap between what's being done at a commercial level, at a higher level, compared to what SME is receiving. We keep hearing every day that SMEs are not bankable because of their informality. But day in, day out, we've heard a couple of conferences in this continent where everyone is talking about development, infrastructure, but we are forgetting the basics, the people that are sustaining the continent as we speak. I speak on behalf of my country, Zimbabwe, where at least $10 billion circulates within this informal market. And then the $2 billion is just found in the formal market. My major problem is I've attended several conferences in the continent. We've had quite a number of those. We keep talking. Nobody is walking the talk. The moment we leave this conference, we cannot get hold of anyone. We send emails. We try to see how we can implement. Don't you think enough is enough? We now need to start implementing. We cannot start talking. The distinguished gentleman here talked about how major corporates are leaving Africa. And be it a policy issue, I'm not really surprised, because as Africa ourselves, we're not doing enough. We love talking, we love gathering, we have all the ideas, we have all the ingredients, but nobody's really implementing anything. We shouldn't blame anyone who's packing their bags and leaving. What's stopping Africa? We have all the resources that we need in this continent. What's stopping us from doing value addition, from the value chains? What's stopping us from doing beneficiation? Why do we always love going around with a begging bowl, asking people to help us? When we could we should stop looking east, west, north, whatever direction. Look within Africa. And until we get the basics right, we're going nowhere. We could have several of these conferences, but nothing's going to happen. Let me give you one good example. My colleague here and I, we arrived in Ethiopia yesterday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But we left the airport 2 o'clock this afternoon. Why? Visa. Why does an African need a visa to get into Africa? When someone who's traveled thousands of miles away is welcomed with open hands. Why do I need to travel to Dubai to come to Africa when I've just left Zimbabwe to come into Africa? Those basic things, until we address those, we're going nowhere fast. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now stop with the questions and answers and allocate roughly about 10 minutes to be able to respond to some of these commentaries.
Okay, well, the first question I'm going to give to my good lady friend here, I think it was Stella's question, and you can respond to that one.
Thank you very much. I'll respond in any way in the best way I can to the lady from Arusha, and just to say a big thank you for bringing those issues up. And that is really why we are convening here. UNECA has provided us with a platform to get this kind of input so that we can put them on the table towards the Africa Digital Compact input that will feed into the Digital Compact, that is the global document. So I think you summarized very well. I could also hear a sense of frustration in there, like saying, well, why are we not getting to the real issues? Now here we are hearing everyone. Let us put those issues on the table, the African issues on the table, so that they can then feed into these global platforms as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I mean, even to that point, I think the overall sort of global financial architecture conversation was really focused a lot on the billions to the trillions. But what came out of a lot of the more recent discussions is that we should actually rather be looking from an institutional investor perspective about how do we address the real economy issues. So the whole billions to trillions framework has now gone to trillions to thousands. And in the context of being able to figure out how do we actually get large allocations to SMEs, the key intermediator is technology. That's what's really going to disintermediate and transform this. So we're in the right place at the right time talking about the right thing. And I think ECA have given us a great platform, hopefully, to almost institutionalize this discussion with the key leaders that will be able to take this forward, work with us, and make this a bit more impactful. So to your point.
Yeah, just to say I feel your pain. I think it's very true that there's a huge gap at the level of SMEs, but even more so at the level of startups. And I think something that should at least give you some reason to be positive is this morning there was a very interesting agreement signed between UNECA and Google, where Google is coming in to provide a lot of support to startups. I think this is the most promising thing that I've heard this past week. And so there are global companies that are coming in and beginning to address that segment of the financing landscape that banks like us are just simply not set up to do. That said, I need to also give you some other good news. We are working on a crowdfunding innovation here in Ethiopia, including the stock exchange. The idea is actually to build on the success of what's been achieved in the US, to see if we can actually upgrade it a little bit and have some more screening and vetting done so that the amounts that can be allocated through that kind of platform can be a bit chunkier and bigger, and it can reach the SMEs easier. That said and done, I think the other good news is a lot of financial conferences these days talk about these issues. We have much bigger allocations. 5 years ago, I didn't have an SME program. Today, I do. And we've been active in a number of countries. We do realize that SMEs need local currency solutions in most cases, not hard currency. So to get over the mismatch issue, what we're doing is we're giving a lot of guarantees. We're going to commercial banks, we're going to SME financiers, we're going to MFIs, and we're telling them, look, double what you're doing. We know you have risk limits, you have appetite issues to go too far, but we will now stand behind you, double up, triple up. If you have problems, we will share the pain. So, you know, that's the good news. There is movement here, but obviously the demands are very big, and this is why the global ecosystem issues need to be addressed. This is why we need to keep attracting big global players here, like I think Ambassador Gatete has done really exceptional by bringing Google to announce this big initiative today. We need more of those. MasterCard Foundation, I think, is one of the other partners. They have very big allocations here. They're doing really well, too. But I think at the global level, the allocations are not enough. I think I go to a lot of pension fund conferences, and even though I have a pretty good story as TDB, I'm a $10 billion institution. I'm pretty strong in the African context. I go outside, and sometimes my ratings are even investment grade. I'm BBB rated. I'm higher rated than, you know, many Eastern European countries, right? But even then, I'm told you come from a geography called Africa. And when we have global allocations, and our allocations to Africa are this size. So even if you have the right ratings, we don't have the allocation to your geography. And these are the things where we need global engagements, we need global champions to help us, you know, push the envelope a little bit more so the deserving players can actually come out, make the case, and get a bit more.
And be a rising tide that lifts all ships at the same time. So over to you, Solomon.
Thank you. The only point I wanted to make is that let's understand that SME financing is very difficult. Many institutions have tried it and failed. I think the solution is to get specialized financing institutions that focus on the SMEs, so they can learn all of the lessons and they can provide tailored solutions to SME financing. So some of this capital that's floating around, that's trying to find a home in blended capital, it should be targeted towards specialist SME financing institutions. So they have the capital, they're on the ground, they can provide the finance and the tailored solutions to the SME financing. If we don't do that, I fear that nothing will change. And the good news is that we've seen lots of these little things springing up in many different countries. In my country, Ghana, there's a couple of new initiatives coming up now where they're looking at all of the issues that have gone wrong and trying to tailor solutions so that SME financing can take place using technology. To me, that's the game changer now, using technology. If you want small loans in many of the developed markets, you actually don't even need to see anybody. You can do it online by an app because they have a system of what works and what doesn't work. We're getting to that stage in Africa. So I see that as the way forward. Technology and specialized SME financing institutions.
Fantastic.
I'll stick with the theme of SMEs and noting that often companies who are partnering in this effort are also addressing the gaps at a more micro level. I elevated 2 examples from our Enabling Ecosystems report, but there are lots of other examples where companies are partnering with smallholder farmers, with SMEs, to be able to improve yields. And it's not in any way to supplant indigenous knowledge, which was raised by our sister, but it's really about providing additional tools, training, resources. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that some of the company partners who were rolling up their sleeves to work at the micro level, include companies like APSA, which is doing ag guarantees, companies like GE Vernova, which is providing additional sustainable energy. Not unlike Google and what they've offered for startups, there are other companies like John Deere offering additional training or access to equipment and resources and technology to be able to better adapt to the current circumstances as growth, and technology really help scale solutions, but also help us address these climate innovations in a way that is meaningful and responsible. And so there are companies that have as part of their mandate, to work at that level in a way that maybe institutional investors are unable to do. So I would just say that that I elevate, the solutions that are offered here and recognize that many of our countries are really powered by small and medium enterprises, micro enterprises in many cases, and that it's incumbent upon all of us in that co-creation of bringing together government and bringing together universities and bringing together businesses and civil society. It's really about bringing everyone to the table so that we can be intentional about developing inclusive solutions.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor. Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.